I played the worst reviewed Final Fantasy games of all time. We've got everything from ports to spin-offs to a game that's so bad Square Enix pulled it off digital stores and you can't even play it anymore. But the question I want to answer in this video is, are they really that bad? I'll be sharing my experiences playing through each of these games and then letting you know if they truly deserve their scores. And the first game we're starting with is A King's Tale Final Fantasy 15. This is one of the many Final Fantasy 15 side projects to help promote the main game. There was everything from mobile games, an anime, a CG film, and even a one-of-a-kind Audi R8. A King's Tale is a side-scrolling beat-em-up where you play as a young King Regis. The game begins with Regis telling a bedtime story to a young Noctis. He wants to hear a different story, so Regis tells him about one of his many adventures. The game is a fairly straightforward beat-em-up. You'll move from left to right, beating up enemies until you reach the end of the level. You have 3 different attacks, a light, a heavy, and then a shield bash. Now you can string together 3 of these attacks in a row to create special moves. Certain enemies' guards can only be broken by specific attacks, so it's sort of this fast-paced puzzle game in a way, trying to remember each enemy's weakness. Now what's cool is if you target an enemy that's far away, you can actually use a warp strike like in the main game, and it's just as fun and feels really good. And eventually you can unlock the ability to use magic like fire, ice, and lightning, and also call in one of 3 different team members to help you out if you do a high enough combo. Now as you defeat enemies, they'll drop health items like apples or chicken, very classic, and you can refill your mana with these little crystals that drop. The first few levels are actually pretty fun. However, while your moveset does increase as the game goes on, it isn't that big, so by the end the game feels pretty repetitive even though it's only like 90 minutes long. Now the final boss was pretty cool. You'll fight Ultros and he has these tentacles that pop up and you have to defeat all of them before you can attack the main body, and then you have other enemies like the Behemoth and the Iron Giant that will also pop up throughout levels. Now once you beat the game, something called Dream Battles unlock where you can take on challenges like beating enemies without using magic or without doing certain attacks or in certain time limits. So it's a way to pad out the length of the game and give it more value, although I guess it doesn't really matter value-wise because the game was free for me. I don't know if they originally sold it for money when it came out, but when I played it, it was just a free download. Now currently the game has a 65 on Metacritic. If I were to give it a score, I'd probably give it maybe something a little bit higher, say like something between a 70 and a 75. It's kind of hard to be upset over this game, especially because it's free, and compared to all the other Final Fantasy 15 side projects, this is one of the more fun ones. It's certainly not one of the best Final Fantasy games of all time, but I don't know if it deserves to be one of the worst either. Next up, we have Final Fantasy 2, specifically the PSP port. Now, I've actually beat Final Fantasy 2 thanks to the Pixel Remaster collection, and considering that I put it at the very bottom of my Final Fantasy series ranking video, I have no intention of playing through it all the way again. What I'm more interested in is why it received such low scores. Was it because critics simply didn't like the game? Were there weird bugs? Let's find out. So after reading through a bunch of reviews, it seemed like, generally speaking, there's a few reasons why it scored so low. The first reason, as I suspected, was that the game just isn't very good. When you look at ranking videos for the entire Final Fantasy series, most people put Final Fantasy 2 at the very bottom. So despite the fact that it got a nice visual facelift, it still doesn't hold up. The other reason that I saw pop up a few times was that people were upset that Square Enix was selling each of these retro Final Fantasy games piecemeal instead of putting them into one big collection. And it seems like they were selling them for $20 each, which even by today's standards seems ridiculous, especially when you consider that they sold the entire Pixel Remaster collection for I think around $60 to $70. So for that reason, I can understand why people would be frustrated with the value proposition. As for the game itself and why people don't typically like Final Fantasy 2, it has a pretty high encounter rate and it has this unique way you level up. You don't level up like a normal RPG, but instead the more you use a particular weapon or a spell or the more times you get hit, random stats will level up instead of you gaining a level and then a bunch of stats leveling up at the same time. And it's not totally fair to look at this particular port through this lens, but when compared to the Pixel Remaster, it's almost a completely different game. The Pixel Remaster has a nice mini-map indicating where certain things are, you have the speed-up mechanics so you can go through battles faster, and overall it just makes the game much more playable. Here in the PSP version, when you're exploring the world on the world map, it's hard to figure out where you're supposed to go, and it can be easy to be in the wrong area where you encounter enemies that are way too high level, and then you're just done. From a visual standpoint, it actually looks really great. I was pretty surprised booting this up for the first time at how much better it looked than the original NES version. So I will say in that sense, they did a pretty nice job with it, but overall, if you're gonna play Final Fantasy 2, definitely play the Pixel Remaster version. I promise you'll save yourself so many more headaches and it'll be a much more enjoyable experience overall. Now, does it deserve the scores it got? I think it does. I think this one's actually pretty fair. Despite the visual facelift, I just don't think Final Fantasy II is a very good game, and even back when this PSP version released, it didn't hold up compared to its contemporaries. Next up, we have Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles Remastered. Now, what's funny about this particular version is it's actually scored lower than the original GameCube version, despite the fact that it got a pretty nice visual facelift. So what that tells me is that either 1, they messed up somehow, or 2, they didn't fix enough things from the original version to make it more playable for modern consoles. I actually remember playing this game on GameCube back in the day and being really confused with it. All I remember was filling up this bucket, going back and forth to the village, and wondering if there was anything else to the game. With this modern remastered version, I'm very curious to take a fresh look at it, actually finish the game, and see what it's really all about. Now, this part I totally forgot about, but when you start the game, you actually get to make your own character. There's 4 different races, and then you can choose the hairstyle and gender. I literally just made the guy on the cover because I guess I'm basic like that. The setup for the story is very simple. Essentially, you're trying to collect this resource called myrrh, which I guess powers the crystal in your village. They don't go into a ton of detail about it, but you get this caravan, and then you go out to where you can collect the myrrh. Now, once you collect it 3 times, you bring it back to the village. 1 year goes by, and you'll do it again and again until you eventually unlock access to battle the final boss. As far as the moment-to-moment gameplay goes, it's something like this. Like I previously mentioned, you need to fill up your container 3 times, and when you go to a particular dungeon and complete it, you fill it up once. Now, once you approach the dungeon, it'll tell you if it has myrrh and what particular elements might be in the dungeon. And it tells you an element because your container can change elements, and you'll need to change elements to get past certain blockades throughout the world, and sometimes it's even a puzzle to figure out how to get the right elements so you can cross into other parts of the world. Now, to beat the game, you have to get the mystery element, which is basically all of them combined and requires you to really pay attention to a long quest line and then complete a series of puzzles. Then you can eventually just go anywhere. The dungeons for the most part are decently designed, with each one having a unique gimmick. For example, there's one where you have to smash a minecart so it keeps moving and breaks through certain walls. There's another where you have to place the chalice on these buttons so water shoots up and then gives you a key to unlock doors. And then there's this really annoying one like this castle. Basically, to open doors, there's little icons on the ground that change every so often. They're related to a particular race, so they won't open unless the icon matches with whatever race your character is. On paper, this sounds like a neat idea, but in practice, it's really annoying. You're essentially just sitting there waiting for it to go by, and there's nothing you can do to make it go faster, so I just felt like the game was wasting my time. Actual combat is where I think this game struggles and why it got such low review scores. At face value, it's a real-time action game. You swing your sword, use items, and cast magic. However, the combat just does not feel good at all. It feels incredibly stiff, and there's not a great way to dodge or block. One of the really annoying things is if you want to switch actions, you have to toggle them with the shoulder buttons. It's not like you can hotkey them to the D-pad or something like that. And this can be so frustrating if you're low on life, because you'll have to quickly cycle through your abilities to get the healing item, and sometimes you can't do it because you're trying to run away from an enemy. It's just very hectic, and you feel like you're at a disadvantage because of how the game is designed. However, after enough time with this game, I sort of got used to its weird, stiff combat, and after looking through it with a totally different lens, I kind of started enjoying it. Instead of looking at this like a real-time action game, I looked at it like a real-time strategy game. And what I mean by that is, instead of assuming that I could swing my sword and have it be this really fluid combat system, whenever I would do an attack, I would look at it like this. It would require some sort of loading or input delay to do the action, and enemies sort of run and stop before doing actions as well. When I looked at it like that, it became much more enjoyable, and I feel like that's almost how the designers had it in mind, because there's no way they would purposefully design it to be this stiff. There were so many other action games at the time that did combat well, so it's not like there weren't other good examples. One really annoying part about exploring dungeons if you're playing this game solo is the chalice. If you're playing solo, you have a Moogle companion that will carry it for you, so it doesn't seem like that big of a deal. However, what's really annoying is you can only go within a certain range of the chalice. If you go outside it, you start losing health. Another annoying thing is that every once in a while, your companion will go, "Oh, I'm tired, can you carry it?" and will start flying slower. So you have to pick the chalice up, walk around incredibly slow, and you can't even defend yourself. And then for what feels like only 5 seconds, they're like, "Okay, I can pick it up again." So it's this really annoying back and forth of putting it down, picking it up, and it's just like, either have the Moogle never get tired, or don't make this a mechanic at all, because it just seemed like a needless hindrance while exploring dungeons. Now, the other thing that can be pretty aggravating about the game is the way you level up. You don't level up or gain traditional experience like a normal RPG. Essentially, as you're exploring the dungeons, you'll pick up these artifacts, and each of these artifacts have stat enhancements like increased health, damage, magic, things like that. Then once you defeat the boss at the end of the dungeon, you can take one of these artifacts that you've collected and it becomes a permanent part of your character. And now you might see how this would be annoying, because you can only do 3 dungeons per year, so you can only really gain 3 stat level ups per year. Over the first couple years, it's not that bad, but after a while, and once you start getting into the end game, when you unlock access to the final dungeon, you have to really grind. And this becomes slow because you have to go through the same levels over and over again, but it's not like they were at the beginning. When you go to them again, harder enemies appear and it becomes much more challenging. I think for me, it took about 10 years total to get properly leveled up and get all the right weapons and armor to be prepared for the final boss. And I have to say, without walkthroughs and guides, there's no way I would have been able to finish this game. I was constantly checking maps, reading walkthroughs, and just trying to figure out where I was supposed to go. And also, let me tell you, that final boss is a doozy. Not only is the initial final boss a long 3-phase fight, but then you go to this other one where you have to answer questions, and if you don't answer correctly, then you have to fight extra enemies, and it becomes a very long process that by the end, I just wanted to be over. It took me around 17 hours to complete the game, and what I find hilarious in the end credits is that it still says distributed by Nintendo, despite this being the PlayStation 5 version. And I can see why reviewers were frustrated with this remastered version. There are some really annoying things that I can't believe never got fixed from the original game, particularly the combat, the menu system, and the fact that it only runs at 30 frames per second. But it was nice to have a visual facelift. Now, is the 59 Metacritic score fair? Objectively, I think it probably is. I had an okay enough time with this game, but there were so many annoying things about the original release that they just didn't fix for this remaster. I can understand this being nostalgic for some, but overall, this just isn't a very good video game. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to like the video. It really helps out a lot. And if you want more videos like this, consider subscribing because there's a ton more coming real soon. All right, next up we have Dirge of Cerberus Final Fantasy VII. This was a third-person shooter starring Vincent Valentine that released in 2006 for the PlayStation 2. Now, I do remember renting this game and thinking it was pretty fun, but also that it was pretty short. I think the novelty of it being a Final Fantasy spin-off carried a lot of weight for me, but considering it's one of the 5 lowest rated Final Fantasy games of all time, I'm really curious to play through this all the way again to see why it got such low review scores. The game opens at the end of Final Fantasy VII as Meteor is falling towards the planet. Vincent and Yuffie are in Midgard trying to evacuate citizens when Vincent comes across the body of Hojo. As he approaches him, Hojo seems to sort of disappear in a flash of light. Meteor then continues crashing towards the planet and Vincent needs to escape. It cuts to 3 years later where Vincent gets a note from Reeve telling him to meet him in Calm. But before he can meet Reeve, a huge squadron of soldiers drops into Calm and starts just shooting everyone. Vincent later learns that soldiers were a part of a new covert Shinra operation called Deep Ground. This was sort of like Soldier in that they were genetically enhanced super soldiers. Their true intention, however, is to control Omega, a giant weapon, but they need the proto-materia, which Vincent unknowingly is in possession of, that he uses to control Chaos, his demonic transformations. Overall, the story isn't anything to write home about. However, it was really cool to see a totally missable character in Vincent from the main game have his own game and deep dive into his backstory as a member of the Turks, as well as learning more about Lucretia, Hojo's research assistant that Vincent was in love with. And as someone who deeply loved Final Fantasy VII, it was just cool to get more story from this universe. There's tons of cutscenes where all the characters from the past join in, especially in the final battle. And the cutscenes are on par with Advent Children, as that movie came out basically around the same time, so I'm sure they were using a lot of the same technology. There were also so many little beats in this game that I totally forgot about, and in hindsight, after playing the first 2 parts of the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy, are really wild. The first were all these different parts with Reeve and Cait Sith. In a funny twist, there's actually a part where there's a robot Reeve being controlled by Cait Sith, whereas it used to be the other way around. And there's even a very brief section where you play as Cait Sith in a stealth scenario. Also, Yuffie is a pretty recurring character throughout the game, and one thing I totally forgot about was that her Moogle cloak debuted here. I remember when I played the Intermission DLC for the first time and she had that cloak on, I thought, oh, that's a cute new thing they're adding here, but obviously she never wore that in the main game. But no, it originally came from Dirge of Cerberus, and that was really interesting to go back to and discover. Now, onto the gameplay. I think this is where the game really suffers and where reviewers felt like it deserved its low scores. Dirge of Cerberus is a stage-based third-person shooter, but the actual shooting mechanics are incredibly awkward. This game came out after both Devil May Cry and Resident Evil 4, in fact several years after, and it's not even in the same league as those games. You have this reticle that you can aim with, but it sort of auto-locks on enemies. At the beginning of the game, it's serviceable, it works, it's not that bad, but when you get a lot of enemies on screen and you're trying to fight a lot at the same time, it just feels really clunky. easy. To go back to Devil May Cry real quick, it feels so good to flow between attacking with your sword and then using your guns. It just feels so smooth. Now Vincent does have a melee attack, but the range is so short because he uses his fists and his legs to attack with. Overall, it just does not feel good to switch between shooting with the guns and then doing melee attacks. Now one thing that I did like was that Dirge of Cerberus has light RPG elements. After completing a stage, you'll get a score as well as experience points, and you can either use those experience points to level up Vincent, which gives him more hit points and he can do more melee damage, but you could also take that experience and convert that into gil. Now you can use that gil for a variety of things. You can buy items like potions and phoenix downs, or you can spend them to upgrade your weapons. Throughout the game, you'll unlock a variety of different guns, and you can equip 3 at a time. Each gun you can upgrade with different attachments like barrels, scopes, and even materia. So there is some room to build out Vincent how you want, customize your guns how you want, and I found that part pretty enjoyable. On top of the different guns you unlock, there's also these turret sections that you'll come across every once in a while that, while fun, are definitely of the time. I think another weak aspect of this game is the level design. For the most part, while you're exploring cities, you do have big open areas to fight in, and it's pretty fun. It feels good to do the double jump and shoot from the air, and you sort of have this acrobatic feel to combat. However, there were so many sections of the game where the levels are incredibly narrow. I'm not even joking, they were no more wide than Vincent's character model. Half the time I could barely see where I was going because the levels were so narrow. In terms of boss fights, they weren't bad. This helicopter boss fight was repeated several times, but there were some clever ones where you have to hide behind debris to dodge attacks. Now, one last area that left me pretty disappointed was the music. Final Fantasy VII has some of the most iconic music of all time, and they didn't use any of it for this game. There's a lot of original music, which I appreciate to a certain extent, but Final Fantasy VII's music is so good that to not use it felt like a huge mistake. Here, the music just kind of felt generic. In the end, it took me about 9 hours to finish, and I had a pretty decent time with it. Again, I think the fact that it was based around Final Fantasy VII carried a lot of weight for me, but if this was just some sort of generic shooter where you play as a vampire fighting random enemies, I probably wouldn't care at all and would say it's definitely deserving of its 57 Metacritic score. However, I don't know what it is, but I just can't bring myself to accept a score this low, and seeing it right next to the lowest reviewed Final Fantasy game of all time just hurts. I think it's a fun playthrough, especially if you're trying to play all the different compilation of Final Fantasy VII games. There's some really interesting lore and fun cameos from other characters that are really cool, and particularly at the time when it came out, it felt amazing because we never really got spin-offs to RPGs like this. In my book, I don't personally think it deserves a 57. That seems really low, but for other people that don't have the same affinity for Final Fantasy VII as I do, I can understand where those scores might come from. And last on this list, and definitely least, we have the unholy turd of the Final Fantasy series, a game with a 25 Metacritic score and was so bad that Square pulled it from digital stores and you can't even play it anymore. And that game, of course, is Final Fantasy All the Bravest. Now, like I said, you can't even play this game anymore on iOS or Android, but I don't need to actually play the game to explain to you why it's so bad, because the gameplay is so simplistic and the monetization so scummy that I think anybody can understand. This, my friends, is Final Fantasy All the Bravest. You go from stage to stage, fighting enemies, and fighting is a real stretch of a word here. Essentially, you have this giant army of generic characters and you have them attack. You just tap them, and then they're on a short cooldown timer, and when it's ready, you just tap them again, and they attack again. But really, the most efficient way to play the game is to just swipe your finger up and down so you can attack as fast as possible. That's it. That's literally all there is to the game. There's not even any strategy. You're randomly attacking enemies, so you can't pick which characters attack which enemies, and it's not like particular characters do more damage anyway. And you want to hear something really gross? If one of your troops gets knocked out, they're on a long cooldown timer until you can use them for another battle, and the game is constantly asking you if you want to revive all your characters for 99 cents. So basically, after every fight, you're going to have to spend $1 or wait a really long time because most of your troops are going to get taken out in the fight. Now, you could actually get named Final Fantasy characters, but you guessed it, you have to spend money on loot boxes, and they're 99 cents for one character, which is crazy. They might do a little bit more damage, and it might be cool to see Yuna out there, but we all know it really wasn't worth it in the end. This was a giant embarrassment, not only for the Final Fantasy series, but Square Enix on a whole. I know this was a time where studios were trying to figure out mobile games, and this may have seemed like a good idea at the time, but the way all these mechanics were implemented were just terrible. And all these years later, it is well deserving of its 25 Metacritic score and being remembered as the worst Final Fantasy game of all time. Now, here's how these 5 games were originally ranked based on their Metacritic scores, and if I were to re-rank them, it would look something like this. But now I ask you, did you play any of these Final Fantasy games? Do you agree with their scores, or should there be other games ranked lower? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And once again, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like it. And if you want to see me take a look at more of the worst reviewed JRPGs, be sure to subscribe because I have a ton more coming soon. Now, if you want to hear about the worst reviewed PS4 JRPGs, watch this video next.